Three trig students, we are going to start to look at the trig functions involving right triangles. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what the parts of the right triangle are. So obviously, in order to be a right triangle, we must have a right angle, which means that we have one 90-degree angle. So then the other two angles are going to be acute because all of the angles together have to equal 180 degrees. So the first part is the side opposite the right angle is called the hypotenuse. And that is always going to be your longest side because it's across from the largest angle. The other two sides are called legs. They don't necessarily have to be the same length, but they are still referred to as legs. One of the rules that holds true for the right triangle is what's called the Pythagorean theorem. Right? That says that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's a way that we can figure out a missing side length in a right triangle. A and b are just letters that or variables that we use for the legs. C is going to be the hypotenuse. So another way we can look at the Pythagorean theorem is to say that the leg squared plus another leg squared equals the hypotenuse squared. And that's an important theorem to remember as we move forward here, because whenever we have a missing side length, we are going to want to use the Pythagorean theorem to help us find that. Okay, so moving on to our 6 trig functions. The 3 main ones that we are going to focus on here are going to be sine, cosine, and tangent. The other 3 that when it comes to are just going to end up being the reciprocals of these functions. So the first thing we're looking at is the abbreviation for sine. So instead of writing S-I-N-E all of the time, we're going to write sine of something. And usually, or not usually, all of what's going to go inside the parentheses is some sort of angle measure. So the ratio that we are going to use for sine, right, is, so if we have a side, we're going to call this side theta. Sine involves the hypotenuse, which we all can identify, which is across from the right angle, and the leg opposite of our angle. So it's going to be sine of theta equals the opposite side over the hypotenuse. All of these trig functions are just going to be a relationship between two sides of a given triangle. When we move on to cosine, our abbreviation is going to be COS, and it's still going to be involving some angle. So our diagram, what the picture is going to look like here, is we start with our right triangle. We still have an unknown angle. And this time we are going to relate our hypotenuse and the adjacent side. And the ratio for cosine is going to be the adjacent side length over the length of our hypotenuse. The last one of our basic trig functions is going to be tangent, and its abbreviation is TAN. And now this time, we're still going to be relating an angle to two sides. And the angle and the sides we're going to relate here are the opposite side and the adjacent side. And our ratio for tangent is going to be tan of theta equals the opposite side length over the adjacent side length. So I would first commit or star this or circle this or however you want to note it, but these ratios of these 3 trig functions are going to be the one you're going to use probably, I would say 90% of the time when we're trying to find missing side lengths. Sine, cosine, and tangent. We also have 3 more additional trig functions, which are going to just be the reciprocals of these 3. So the reciprocal of sine we call cosecant, and we are going to abbreviate that CSC of theta. So our cosecant, since it's just the reciprocal of sine, is going to be the hypotenuse over the opposite. The reciprocal of cosine is secant. That's abbreviated SEC. And again, it's just the reciprocal of cosine. So SEC, secant of theta, equals the hypotenuse over the adjacent side. And lastly, the reciprocal of tangent is going to be cotangent, which is abbreviated COT. And its abbreviation, again, just being the reciprocal, is going to be, instead of opposite over adjacent for tangent, it's going to be the adjacent side over the opposite side. Again, we're going to use these to help us find missing side lengths, right? Pythagorean theorem requires that we know two sides. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to find two sides all the time. Sometimes we may be given an angle on a side, and that's where the trig functions come into play. So to help us remember our 6 trig functions, we have this acronym that's at the bottom of your paper, or mnemonic device, I guess I should say, called SOHCAHTOA. And it's going to help us remember what goes with what. So sine has the opposite side and the hypotenuse side in a ratio. Cosine has the adjacent and the hypotenuse related together. And tangent has opposite and adjacent related together. Okay, so I'm going to stop this video here. You can move on to the next video to look at how we can find these or write these ratios with a given triangle.